But back to cyberpunk.
Yeah.
I f- there is an underworld that might be more frightening in the digital realm. Are we living in Gibson's dystopia currently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's more that Gibson's gotten closer and closer to the present moment with the way he describes dystopias. That's maybe why it feels like we're living in Gibson's sci-fi future. There's a sense in which figures like himself or Bruce Sterling or John Shirley or K.W. Jeter were able to predict certain aspects of what was coming, but it's not like it was a full picture. I mean, the thing that strikes you about 80s cyberpunk when you read it now is nobody has a mobile phone. So, it's not like it was its predictive power that made it powerful.
Mm,
I don't know. My generation, your generation, we were kind of the first to have home computers, mobile
yeah.
phones, the internet, but we can also kind of remember what the world was like before that. So I
Mm,
think for us, cyberpunk is our literature. It's kind of the literature of people trying to conceptualize what a world shaped by those technologies might look like. And yet at the same time, William Gibson typed Neuromancer on a 1927 Hermes portable typewriter.
mhm.
That's the machine he wrote the famous phrase about the internet being a consensual hallucination on. So I think it's one of those things. Like for me, I obviously saw the cyberpunk stuff go mainstream with the Matrix in the late '90s, and even before that, movies
Johnny
like
Mnemonic.
Hackers, Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah.
So it was already kind of like an aesthetic
Lawnmower
that,
Man.
yeah, it's slightly almost become played out. But I think it's inherently a political genre as well as an aesthetic one because it's concerned with inequality in a direct way, and
Mhm.
it's concerned with consciousness and it's concerned with reality. And I think writers like Gibson or Neil Stevenson, they kind of dramatize the ethical and political concerns that people already have about things like virtual reality, artificial intelligence. Um, it's difficult to deal with any of those things in a setting that's too fantastical, too futuristic. So you've got these genres that are kind of like post cyberpunk, like solar punk, biopunk, retro futurism, and these all feel kind of quite regressive to me, just because
Give us an
they're.
idea of solar punk, because I don't think everybody knows solar punk.
So I haven't read a ton of it myself. Again, I'm quite skeptical of it as a genre, but I think it's basically solar punk is based on the idea that there will be advanced technology based on solar extraction. So if
Mhm,
I think like I talk about this in the book as well, but there's a system called the Kardashev scale,
mhm,
um, developed by a Soviet astronomer, and he basically says there's three types of civilization. And a type three Kardashev civilization would be able to draw upon all the resources of the sun and its solar system. It can, use all of that energy, harness it somehow. So solar punk is kind of set in worlds like that, I believe. So I think these are kind of like offshoots of cyberpunk, which I suppose go in slightly more optimistic directions, less
mhm.
dystopian directions. But I think that makes them less useful. Cyberpunk to me is more in that tradition that includes people like Philip K. Dick and George Orwell and Stanislaw Lem, in that it's about consciousness and control and how the state intersects with technology and how humanity intersects with reality. So in a way, I don't think of it as the best genre of SF. I kind of think of it as the only genre of SF.
Okay. Gotcha. Um, what role does I can't talk right now, authoritarianism play in shaping the dystopian society?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I think for me, authoritarianism as a tendency in the societies we're living in right now, it's a reaction to the weakening of capitalism.
Mm,
Like what's the rights capital at the box office, shall we say,
mhm,
at the ballot box? It's the destruction of rights and property.
mhm,
And the destruction of rights and property is always going to play well with an electorate when that threat feels imminent. And when things, have a particularly apocalyptic hue when in terms of the way they're discussed in the media, or when we're living through multiple intersecting crises as we are right now, as we're likely to be doing more of, those are the times when authoritarianism plays well, and that's when populist authoritarian governments are elected. So I think that's why we're seeing them rise just now,
Mhm.
and I think it's 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 always the corporation who's the bad guy in cyberpunk. That's another thing that I like about it as a genre. And at the moment, authoritarianism seems to me a substantial threat, one that's likely to increase as the world, gets worse, as collapse happens, as more and more crises intersect. There's maybe less of a threat than corporate influence and corporate control and dark money, you know?
Mhm.
So I think like I'm definitely less scared of the consequences of a second Trump term than I am of the growing power and influence of people like Elon Musk in a way. I think that those are, you know, interesting to contrast, but of different weight, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Professor and author Lester Spence wrote an essay around the time that Elon Musk purchased Twitter. And in that essay, he says that, and I'm totally paraphrasing, he basically says, as many people kind of talked about how he was going to ruin this platform and it's going to shit, that was never the point. The point was a political move to control conversations. Um, Do you think that was the Elon Musk move? And should we be frightened about things like that? These people are literally controlling the conversation and giving us this feeling that no, 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 we're pushing the conversation. It's like, oh no, you're
Hmm.
following what they're saying.
So this has a couple of aspects for me. Musk is such a fascinating figure because you can look at him and you can talk about things like transhumanism with this Neuralink project. Like one of the writers that I draw on in the book is John Gray. He's very skeptical about the idea of progress. He thinks that the illusion of progress is kind of it's almost like an optical illusion caused by the short human time span.
Mhm.
No matter what period of time you're alive in, it will look like progress to you because you only live less than 100 years. He also says that the promises of transhumanism, whether that's to augment the body, extend the lifespan through drugs, whether it's to upload the consciousness into some sort of digital hereafter. He calls all of these secular heresies. They're kind of like varying variations on the Christian heaven. The idea that the good will be rewarded in some kind of eternal life. These are like hangovers of Judeo-Christian ways of thinking. And furthermore, what he says is that things like the digital hereafter of uploaded transhuman human consciousness, those things are dependent on human infrastructure. So if we're in a collapsing world, the very physical disk space on which that digital heaven would be contained would also be at threat from any kind of infrastructure collapse. So, in that sense, I think it's dangerous that people like Musk are
Mhm.
in the driving seat of all of these technologies. And the reason for that is these are technologies that, if you think about, artificial intelligence, various forms of kind of, augmentation of humans
Mhm.
with machine parts, all of these things are kind of probably going to be likely to happen. Same with automation. That's probably going to happen where a lot of us are going to get automated out of our jobs. And that doesn't just mean manual labor either, as we're seeing with ChatGPT and other large language models. I think the point is that um, these aren't going to bring about a more egalitarian post-capitalist system. And that's because people like Musk, who believe in profit, who believe in, you know, uh, strange, absurdist kind of systems like long-termism, that say that the threat of rogue AI in the future is of greater proportion than the threat of climate change now. These kinds of ways of thinking, they're not accountable to scrutiny, regulation, democratic commentary, and particularly if you look at the influence that Musk had with his satellite network in terms of his interference in the Ukraine-Russia war. We can't allow people to have that level of power over these new technologies. That's going to go in a very dangerous way very quickly, and arguably already has. And that's kind of another point I wanted to make about the book is that when you read people writing about the future, I think I picked on Naomi Klein in the book, but it's far from she's far from the only person who does this.
Mhm.
We always write about it in the way of unless we do X, this will happen.
Mhm.
If we can get quick enough, if we can get fast enough, if we can get smart enough, then the idea is that we can beat
Yeah.
the negative effects of these technological changes, the negative effects of increasing authoritarianism, or a more precarious climate. I think we need to start thinking about them in terms of, what if we don't beat them?
Mhm.
What if they do take more power?
Mhm.
What if things do get worse? A little bit of that kind of thinking could be useful. And there are a few people making noises like that. Jem Bendel, he's written about deep adaptation, so strategies for accepting certain levels of collapse and then dealing with them.
Mhm.
Arne Nice is, as well as, has got a similar kind of complementary philosophy, of a way of looking at the collapse of humanity is a little bit something of an inevitability, and then how do you live well in the interim that we have? So the problem with philosophies like that, which are very tempting and very humanist, is that they can easily kind of as well be, I guess, co-opted by a far right that in some way thinks that a collapse would be a good thing, that it would be some sort of reset, that it would be some sort of opportunity to restore the scales, or even, there's definitely people out there who would look forward to a kind of Darwinian resource conflict Earth. You only have to look at doomsday preppers, and listen to the reasons they say they've built their bunkers to
Mhm.
figure out that there are people like that out there. So I think that's where I'm going with all of this, is that nobody's really looking fully and frankly at the worst case scenarios. And I think I maybe skim 5 to 10% of this in the book. I touch a little on the hard science, but I'm far from a scientist. I don't think we have anybody arguing in a very helpful way about the apocalypse right now. All we have are people saying, well, if we do this, maybe we can avoid it. Maybe we can't.